I have to do is figure out how we get this started. What are the keys to cancel? Go back one. What's back?
Oh. Sorry, what's going on here? Sorry,
Yeah,
apologies.
go select that one.
Seems to have-
We're going to take a little different approach, but talk about what we're doing in terms of creating a system like Sherborn did for all animals, but just for diptera. So what I want to first do is tell you something about the flies themselves. Unfortunately, that's my wife wondering what I'm doing. Flies are beautiful. Flies are ancient. The history of the clade parallels birds. They go back about the same. And there's a lot of species. We estimate that there probably represents about 16% of the known biodiversity. This is an older slide when they were only 10%, but the recent calculation increases that number. And they're critically important. People like to talk about pollination and how important pollination is. So here's the bees of the world. Unfortunately, that's a fly. Flies are also important for disease transmission, model organisms for genetics, plant pests, etc. But the key point for all of us is the access to the knowledge about flies, and everything else in zoology and in biology is by names. Names are critical. For a user, they have a problem. What's the cause of the problem? It's an organism. That is a specimen. And that specimen links you to the name, and it's the name what the people have that gives them information. So when they see something like that, they say, what is it? Then they get a name. And then that name tells them whether it's an invasive species or not. So our focus is on names and the knowledge that names allow us access to. So our concern is about the growth of that knowledge and how to access it. There are basically two tracks. One track is the taxonomy track, which is systematics and taxonomy. The other is the Sherborn track, the bibliographic track from the literature. I will show you just that the problem ever increases. We estimate there's about 2,000 new names of diptera every year. And the other challenge is the number of authors. There are more and more people. Over 4,000 people published on flies today, and every year we get more. Given this growing, vast amount of knowledge, the challenge has been addressed by dividing it up, either on groups. Sherborn said all of animals, the plant people had their cuensis. We've also done it by time. Sherborn said, okay, I only can do the first 100 years. And there's also division by geography and people. So for us in zoology, the first division was by Linnaeus. He had everything. And that ended on the 13th edition. Next was Fabricius, one of the students. And he said, I'm just going to do entomology. And that started in 1758. But less than 30 years later, entomology became too great. So Fabricius said, I'm just doing flies. Today, we have given up doing everything, and we're gone into regional areas. The first of which was Meigen, who did Europe, and Wiedermann, who did the rest of the world. So today, again, we can't summarize, as did Fabricius and Linnaeus, which is not only a catalog, but also the diagnosis and description of what they are. We summarize it in terms of what we call catalogs. The first catalogs were 1858, Austin Sacken. Now, recently, we have done world catalogs for each of the regions, etc. We have attempted to do world catalogs, started in 1902. Cortez from Budapest started Unfortunately, never got it completed due to the First World War and other things. And today we have Systema Diptorum, started in 1984 today, and that's what I'm going to talk about. But I need to remind you, as Neil did, there are bibliographies out there. Agassiz, most important for entomologists is Hagen, and then the group in Germany at DEI, Deutsches Entomological Institute, did a next one. And we're most fortunate to have Neil give us one which covered everything up until 1930 in terms of books, and then there are regional works. Indexes, you've heard them all. I remind you that the generic indexes go back to Agassiz, followed by Marshall, who was from Austria, Scudder, the American, Neve here, and the Germans, Schultz. The key point that I want to emphasize is there's changing standards. When we look at Sherborn, we have to remember that he was working on a code of nomenclature, was the Strickland code. And therefore that affected his discovery, capture, and management of data. And the other point which has been emphasized is that his was paper and pencil. Literature, accessibility, he based everything on what he could access here in the library. Today that's changed. But at least from what I've examined, in terms of Diptera, he was amazingly good. He had 6 fields of information that he captured for Diptera names or all zoological names. He had only 2 classification levels, order and genus, and he only had 2 elements that he looked at in terms of code compliance. Was the word that he was indexing binomial, and was the work having Latin names as opposed to vernacular names. So those are only 2 code things that he checked. And bibliographic data was minimal, author, year, abbreviated title of the book, and he gave no record for serial literature other than the volume, name, and page. The results, one study that we did with Adrian Pont back in 1994, we looked at all the names described in the genus Musca, of which Sherborn had 1,807. And out of that set, and this is species group names, we found only 3 errors. He put a mouse in there. Genus for mice is M-U-S, so forth, slight thing. And the other were 2 slight spelling errors in the epithet. And in the 20-some-odd years since we published, Neil has only found 1 name which we missed. And it's very interesting because if you look out there, the name was in a German work and invented in Fraktur type, which Sherborn apparently missed. So very good in terms of species group names. Generic names, there was 1,959 names of genera in Sherborn. Of that, we missed 43, which Sherborn has, but which are not in ours. No, we have 43 that he missed. There is 380 names that we've added to our system that Sherborn didn't have. But every one of them are misspellings or emendations. And it's very clear that Sherborn, when he indexed it, said, oh, that's a misspelling. It's irrelevant. It has no importance. Today in nomenclature it does, so we include them. And it's very interesting, the majority of them are from Agassiz, Agassiz's index of generic names. Again, there are 17 names that Sherborn missed because changed the rules in nomenclature. And these are names in synonymy, which previously had no relevance, but today are important if they are used. Systema Noctua for the same period has 2,405. As I say, in doing the recheck back and forth, I found out that we missed 27. And surprisingly, the 27 we missed included 11 from Agassiz. Agassiz is a very complex work and has lots of misspellings and variants, orthographic variants in it. This is what amazes me. This is how he worked. Today I work with a computer, but here's a little note that he wrote his friend Griffiths and said, help me find some literature. And that is his want list. so forth. And what's interesting is he has a little note on the side, says that he wants the third edition 1788. He says, that's the one I want, but I'll swap you for the fourth. But one of the things to remember about Sherborn, even though he was a man of modest means, he tried to find menacing literature, and when he did, he acquired it and passed it on to this library. So this library is the most remarkable natural history library available, large in part because people like Sherborn. Today, things are different. Our nomenclators reflect two different kinds of things that are going on. We call them builders, like Animal Base in Germany, like Zoological Record, our Systema Natur, and the future and currently operating Zoobank. We are the people who are acquiring names, going out to the literature and looking for it. But also we have a very complex world to the user because they're consolidators, like IDIS, the Integrated Taxonomical Information System in the United States. Species 2000, which Frank Bisbee set up. GBIF, with their global names architect. UBio is probably the biggest one out there. They take in all kinds of names, et cetera, and so forth, et cetera. But they're consolidators. The real work is being done by the builders. And ultimately, what is filtered from and consolidated from the builders, such as Species 2000, ends up to the users, to the Encyclopedia of Life, and there are others, like zip code, zoo, et cetera, and so forth. So names are important, but you need to remember that it's the builders who are actually doing the work. Our standards are much higher because we work on the fourth edition of the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature, what requires us to document much more. Our discovery, capture, and management is much better because it's partially automated, but it still takes the individual to look at the original literature and put it into the computer. Once it's in the computer, we can manipulate it and do a lot of things with it, but it still is only partial. Yes, UBio scans BHL documents and pulls out anything it thinks is a name, but that is a long way from scientific names that we talk about. Accessibility to literature is becoming amazingly easy because of BHL scanning it. BHL is a cooperation of this library, libraries in the United States, even little libraries in North Carolina University would have something unique, they're scanning and pulling. And also Google Books. So today, the accessibility problem to literature, which Sherborn has, it's going away for us. Results are essentially unknown. And, again, we now have 16 different fields of information for every name we capture, whereas Sherborn had much less. We have to capture information about types, where the types are, and things like that. We also have to capture different levels of classification. We capture between the order and the genus, there are 16 levels of classification in our system. There's 12 different things that we have to check to see for compliance with the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature. And we now use 9 fields of bibliographic data, try to break it down into more data that corresponds to what the libraries use. I can say our results are much better than all our predecessors because, as was quoted earlier, like Newton said, we stand on the shoulders of giants. What we have learned from Sherborn and everybody else, we have consolidated and put together, so we are much better. And we also, especially with Neil's help, have discovered some things that others have missed. But what surprises Neil and Nigel Robinson in the background is how many things get published in obscure places like Puerto Rico, the Mussets of Puerto Rico, which I'm embarrassed to say there was a copy in the Smithsonian Library, but I even missed it, etc. So one of the real problems today is the proliferation of publications that come out in places you don't know, but they conform to the code, and because they're not picked up by myself or the Zoological Record or Neil, we're missing them. So we don't know how well we are, and that talks to the need for Zoobank and registration. Just to give you a summation, We have over 200,000 species names, representing 162,514 named valid things. We got 23,000 generic names, of which 12,000 are valid. We don't have the problem of ornithology. We have much less genera than species. And we are currently now have 32,000 references. We're slow in rechecking, I should emphasize, the verification against traditional literature. But we assume that our predecessors were pretty correct, so we're probably about 95% accurate. We're online. Anyone who wants to go to dipter.org, you'll see us, and you can put in your query. We're name-based, but it will deliver the valid name, current valid name, for whatever thing. So we include taxonomy as well as nomenclature. So come look at us. That's a sample record, which gives you the name, the information on the type locality, where the type is, the current status. This is a available valid name, etc. And then the original name, distribution, and the citation. And there's also a verification code. Verification code 99 says that I put that record in. So there is a way of backtracking and seeing who did the work. Thanks. I need to say the Schlinger Foundation has been our major sponsor for the last 11 years. Species 2000 has supported us last year. We've had limited over the years support from mainly in part-time salary from ARS, GBIF, and the Smithsonian. Our biggest support comes from the dipter community, and most importantly are the bottom three people. Over the years, Neil and Adrian have contributed significantly to us, and Irini is now helping us greatly. So thank you very much.